Barry Gibb was born Barry Allen Crumpton Gibb on September 1st, 1946, in Douglas on the Isle of Man. He was the second of 5 children born into a household where music was a way of life. His parents, Hugh and Barbara Gibb, encouraged creativity and sound, shaping an environment where performance felt natural rather than forced. From a young age, Barry showed a unique talent for writing melodies that carried emotional depth. This early ability would become the defining element of his musical identity in the decades to come. After the family moved to Manchester, England, and later to Redcliffe, Queensland, Australia, Barry's musical ambition strengthened. It was there that he began performing alongside his younger twin brothers, Maurice and Robin. Their voices blended in a way that felt instinctive, forming a sound that was richer than the sum of its parts. In the late 1950s, the 3 brothers began performing together under the name that would later gain worldwide recognition, the Bee Gees. Their early performances in small Australian venues helped them refine their sound and sense of identity as musical storytellers. In the mid-1960s, a turning point arrived when they caught the attention of Australian DJ Bill Gates and producer Robert Stigwood. The brothers were brought to England, where their rise was swift. Their music quickly found its place in the global charts, with songs like Massachusetts and To Love Somebody revealing their gift for harmonies and emotional expression. Barry's role as the oldest brother positioned him naturally as a creative lead. His songwriting, producing, and vocal direction helped guide their artistic vision. The 1970s became a defining era. Barry's use of falsetto emerged not by planning, but by experimentation, and it transformed the Bee Gees' sound into something unmistakable. With the release of the Saturday Night Fever soundtrack, the Bee Gees didn't just participate in disco culture, they helped shape it. Songs like Staying Alive, Night Fever, and How Deep Is Your Love became cultural landmarks. The soundtrack became one of the best-selling albums of all time, earning major awards and global recognition. Barry's influence was not limited to the Bee Gees. His songwriting and production abilities extended to major artists across genres. He wrote hits such as Guilty for Barbra Streisand, Chain Reaction for Diana Ross, and Islands in the Stream for Kenny Rogers and Dolly Parton. His adaptability set him apart. No matter the era or genre, he could find the emotional thread and shape it into a song that connected with listeners. However, alongside artistic success came personal loss. Barry experienced the deaths of his 3 brothers, Andy in 1988, Maurice in 2003, and Robin in 2012. These losses weighed heavily on him, affecting both his personal life and artistic expression. Each brother represented not only family but also the creative bond that shaped his identity from childhood. Despite the emotional toll, Barry continued creating music, honoring their memory in his later works. Barry's personal life was marked by experiences of growth and stability. His first marriage to Maureen Bates began in 1966 but ended in 1970, a time when fame was beginning to reshape his world. That same year, he met Linda Gray, a former Miss Edinburgh. Her grounded presence became the emotional foundation on which he built his life moving forward. Their marriage endured through every era of his career and personal journey, providing the stability he needed to navigate both success and grief. In the later decades of his career, Barry became more reflective, choosing projects that aligned with emotional meaning rather than commercial ambition. He continued recording, performing, and occasionally appearing on public platforms to discuss his life, losses, and artistic evolution. His legacy expanded beyond music charts and awards into something deeper, a commitment to emotional truth in songwriting, performance, and personal growth. It is from this place of reflection that Barry eventually began speaking more openly about Cliff Richard, not as a headline or controversy, but as part of the story of his generation. Both men experienced extraordinary fame, intense media scrutiny, creative evolution, and personal challenges. They understood each other not simply as musicians, but as survivors of an industry that tested personal identity as much as artistic ability. Barry chose his later years to finally speak about Cliff Richard because the meaning of that relationship became clearer with time. It was not about commercial partnerships or public appearances. It was about respect, for endurance, for authenticity, and for the ability to maintain one's sense of self in a world that constantly tries to reshape it. As Barry Gibb continued to evolve both personally and musically, his understanding of the relationships around him changed as well. Among the figures who quietly influenced him over the years was Cliff Richard, a man whose career began earlier, whose fame arrived sooner, and whose presence in the music world had already shaped expectations for British artists. Barry first encountered Cliff during the early rise of the Bee Gees, when the group was still refining its identity. At the time, Cliff Richard had already achieved widespread success as one of the United Kingdom's most recognizable pop artists. Barry observed something in Cliff that stood out distinctly in an industry known for excess, unpredictability, and ego. Cliff was steady. He carried himself with composure and discipline, maintaining his values and sense of identity even as fame shifted the world around him. Barry later described Cliff as one of the earliest examples he saw of someone who balanced celebrity with genuine character. Cliff's approach to music and life suggested that it was possible to succeed without sacrificing integrity, something that left a lasting impression on Barry in the early years of his career. Barry also recognized the cultural significance of Cliff Richard's success during the 1950s and 1960s. Cliff helped open the doors for British musicians internationally, proving that artists from the UK could compete on a global stage dominated largely by American performers. At that time, young British musicians often felt overshadowed by the American music scene. Barry acknowledged that seeing Cliff break through reinforced the possibility that he and his brothers could also find their place in global music. This understanding served as motivation during the Bee Gees' early struggles. Despite mutual respect, Barry and Cliff were not close personal companions. Their careers placed them in different circles, with different professional responsibilities, audiences, and creative directions. The Bee Gees' distinct sound, particularly during the disco era, pushed Barry into new creative territories, while Cliff remained rooted in a more classic pop and inspirational music direction. Even so, whenever the two met, they shared a familiarity shaped by shared experience. Fame, longevity, and industry survival formed an unspoken bond. Barry later reflected on the nature of fame, acknowledging that relationships in the industry often drift not because of conflict, but because careers move fast and demand constant presence. He admitted that the whirlwind of recording sessions, touring schedules, and media expectations during the Bee Gees' peak years left little space for maintaining consistent friendships. He described this period as one where success moved faster than life itself, leaving the emotional aspect of connection behind. Even so, Barry's admiration for Cliff did not fade with distance. Barry frequently pointed out that Cliff was one of the few major public figures who maintained his principles despite public scrutiny. Cliff continued to practice his faith, perform his music, and remain true to his personal identity, even when trends in popular culture shifted dramatically around him. Barry regarded his resilience as a form of strength, a steady, enduring presence in a world where many artists struggled to maintain direction. Barry also recognized the emotional challenges of longevity in the music industry. Both he and Cliff experienced the loss of peers and loved ones over the years. Barry endured the deaths of his brothers Andy, Maurice, and Robin, losses that reshaped every part of his personal and creative life. Cliff, too, experienced the emotional weight of outliving many people who played meaningful roles in his journey. Barry understood that surviving fame was not simply a matter of career endurance. It required emotional discipline, resilience, and a deep sense of personal grounding. When Barry spoke about Cliff later in life, he did so from a place of perspective rather than nostalgia. He saw in Cliff someone who continued to create, continued to perform, and continued to stand firmly in who he was. He valued that Cliff had not allowed public perception, industry pressure, or shifting musical trends to change the core of his identity. To Barry, this was not just a professional accomplishment. It was a personal achievement. Barry's reflections also revealed an understanding that artists of their generation share something rare, the experience of building careers in a time when music demanded emotional sincerity. He believed that both he and Cliff belonged to an era where songwriting held purpose, where lyrics were expected to mean something, and where performance was viewed as a form of emotional communication rather than spectacle alone. In speaking about Cliff Richard, Barry expressed gratitude more than revelation. His words were not meant to expose hidden stories or controversies. They were spoken as acknowledgement of influence, of resilience, of example, and a quiet mutual respect between artists who endured what many could not. As Barry Gibb entered his later years, reflection became a natural part of his life. The world saw him not only as the last surviving member of the Bee Gees, but also as an artist who had endured decades of evolution in the music industry. The losses he experienced, particularly the deaths of his brothers, reshaped his understanding of legacy and memory. For Barry, every song, Every performance and every conversation now carried deeper meaning. It was during this period of reflection that he chose to speak honestly about Cliff Richard, not as a grand revelation, but as a message of respect that had been unspoken for decades. Berry explained that Cliff represented something important in the early years of his career. When the Bee Gees were still developing their identity and sound, Cliff had already navigated the difficult process of becoming a public figure. He had faced the pressures of fame, the shifting expectations of the industry, and the scrutiny of the media. Yet, he maintained his composure and his values. Berry admired that Cliff did not let the image demanded by the industry reshape who he was at his core. For Berry, this served as proof that success did not have to mean losing oneself. In recalling their interactions, Berry emphasized that their friendship was built on mutual understanding rather than regular companionship. They were not the type of friends who spoke daily or remained in constant communication. Instead, theirs was a relationship rooted in recognition of the challenges each endured, the sacrifices each made, and the emotional price of a life lived in the spotlight. Every time their paths crossed, the respect between them was immediate, uncomplicated, and lasting. Berry also reflected on how survival itself can become a bond among artists of their era. Many of their peers did not make it through the pressures of fame, the exhaustion of touring, or the emotional strain of public life. Berry mentioned that both he and Cliff had watched close friends and loved ones face hardships that came with the weight of celebrity. The fact that both men continued not only to live but to perform and create was a testament to resilience. Surviving the industry, Berry said, was its own form of endurance, one that only those who experience it firsthand could truly understand. He spoke with particular emotion when discussing how Cliff remained true to his personal identity and faith. Berry acknowledged that the music industry often encourages reinvention, image shifts, and public performance of personality. Cliff, however, remained consistent in who he was, even when public opinion shifted, even when trends changed, and even when his values did not align with what was fashionable. Berry saw this constancy as a form of strength, a quiet defiance that held more power than spectacle. Berry emphasized that his decision to speak about Cliff was rooted in gratitude. He wanted to acknowledge that Cliff had played a role, not in shaping the Bee Gees sound, but in shaping the cultural environment that allowed them to dream, create, and succeed. Cliff had proved that British musicians could capture global audiences. He demonstrated that authenticity and humility could coexist with fame. He left a path for others to follow, and Berry wanted to recognize that publicly. As Berry shared these reflections, he did so with the quiet tone of someone who has seen both the brilliance and the cost of success. He spoke not as a performer addressing his fans, but as a man looking back on a long life in music, a life marked by extraordinary highs and profound losses. His words carried the weight of understanding that comes only with time. In closing his thoughts on Cliff Richard, Berry stated plainly that people often look for drama where there is none. The truth, he said, is simple. Cliff is a good man. He remained steady in a world that does not reward steadiness. He remained kind in a world that often encourages ego. And he continued to sing, create, and live with purpose. To Berry, that was something to honor. At 79, Barry Gibb spoke not to reveal a secret, but to acknowledge a legacy of shared endurance. It was a recognition of one artist to another, an expression of respect, admiration, and quiet appreciation for a fellow survivor of a world that few truly understand.